Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of From the Vault, brought to you by Murphy's Vault. How you doing, Nathaniel?
I'm doing good. This time I did my research, and I came prepared. The 7th From the Vault was From the Vault Annihilation, whose theme was board sweepers.
Okay.
So I think that actually fits quite well into some of the topics we're going to talk about this week, although not necessarily the first few ones. But yeah, I'm doing all right. I can't seem to win a match of Magic the Gathering for love nor money, but that's not the only thing in my life, right? So we've got other stuff going on. So yeah,
obviously, this isn't. We're actually going to run out of From the Vaults, aren't we? There's definitely going to be
quickly.
more.
There's not that many.
Episodes. Do we just start making them up and giving wizards suggestions at that point?
Maybe. Okay. I mean, it's more likely I just stop this bit at some point, but I'm liking the bit for now. So
it's pretty good for now. Let's not run through From the Vault Annihilation.
I was not planning on it.
Okay, good. I was just checking your bit. Before I introduce our guest that we've got on the show today, let's just talk about, I want to talk about Murphy's Vault. So please check us out on murphysvault.com. If you're in Edinburgh, come and see us. We're kind of in the Bruntsfield area, if you're familiar with Edinburgh.
It's a nice area. I live there.
Yeah, it is a nice area. I used to live there. But yeah, we've usually got a thing going most days, and we're often in there jamming matches of whatever the next tournament is. So yeah, check us out. It's Vault Murphy on Twitter, murphysvault.com, and we've got a WordPress with articles, which we'll link in the show notes. But our guest tonight is the one, the only, Jaren Dunnerr. How you doing, Jaren?
I'm good, thanks, Dan. It's kind of strange being referred to as a guest because
you're the producer.
Well, yeah, because I'm here every week. I'm just not usually saying anything.
Right. How's it going?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Good. Okay, so we've got you on tonight to talk about, for our Legacy aficionados, Reanimator Depths.
Yeah. So, GP Birmingham is next week, and I'm actually not going to be playing this deck for the main event, but my intention is to take it to the PTQ on the Sunday.
Oh, is it a PTQ Legacy? I totally missed that.
There's one of each, actually. There's a Legacy one and a standard one on the Sunday, yeah.
So what you're saying is that if I bomb out of the Legacy and I bomb out of the standard, then I get to play more Magic for a lot of money.
No, Dan, what we're saying is if you win the Legacy, then you get to play more Legacy.
Okay, so then I get 2 PT invites in one weekend. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, I'm into that.
Can you play the PTQ if you just queued for the PT from the...
I'm sure you can. Do you not just stack invites? I have no idea how
I don't think you stack invites. I don't think that's how it works.
Oh, no, because they'll be for the same PT. What the hell am I saying? Never mind. Anyway,
just sitting on an enormous stack of PT invites. I'm good until 2045, buddy.
I think that's essentially what being plat is, though.
You have to maintain plat.
I know, but as long as you stay in plat, you're... Anyway, Reanimator Depths.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about... So, Reanimator Depths is a deck that burst... I mean, and maybe Jaren actually knows a bit more of the history than me, but it burst onto Legacy a little, relatively recently, for Legacy decks at least.
I think it was maybe a year and a half ago that I first saw it. It was Bob Wong did a video for Channel Fireball with that was the first version of the deck that I'd seen, though it maybe been about a bit before that.
So I think I don't know, maybe I give this guy too many props. He is maybe actually a god, but there's a guy called Eric Landon who plays a lot on Magic Online.
He's usually the trophy leader and just pretty much spams Black Red Reanimator.
He plays a lot of Black Red Reanimator, but he also plays a lot of Lake of the Dead, Entomb Reanimate decks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he might have been the guy. I think he's the guy who invented Reanimator Depths. I've seen him talk about it at least, and people talk about it in a way that implies that he was the guy who originally invented the deck concept. But basically, the deck concepts, it's a deck of 2 halves, and it's been around for a while. But they got put together into the same deck relatively recently in Legacy terms. And it's kind of been getting a bit of traction, and it's certainly something to be aware of. And we wanted to talk to Jaren, who's a guy who's been playing a lot more of it than either of us have, and so probably has a much deeper understanding of how the deck actually functions and why you would want to play this than either me or Dan do. So we're going to talk to him about it. So, Jaren, can you give us an overview rundown of the deck list and the game plans and the like lines of play that you commonly take?
Sure, yeah. So, I'll make sure that the link is in the description so you guys can see the deck. But just to go over it briefly, it's got a reanimation package in it, Entomb Reanimate. Also got a split of Animate Dead and Exhume. Currently going with like a one of Iona and a Grizzlebrand. And then we've got some Grave Titans and a Massacre Worm as well. And Nathaniel did mention that it was a deck of 2 halves. So I would venture to say that it's actually a deck of 3 halves, not thirds. Halves. Because the third game plan is, I know we've not got to the second yet, but the third game plan is just hard casting Grave Titans and the like. So it's called Reanimator Depths. Second game plan is Dark Depths combo. You've got Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, Hex Mage, and Urborg to make sure that all your lands tap for black and you can cast all your heavy black spells. Other than that, you've got some fast mana with Petals and Dark Rituals, which just allow you to have like explosive starts and some disruption as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing 4 Thoughtseize, 3 Collective Brutality, which I actually do kind of want to talk about that specific discard package a little bit. But yeah, so obviously this deck is a bit of an odd one to look at. You know, Reanimator's an established archetype in Legacy. Depths, I mean, it is basically 2 established archetypes at this point in Legacy. Like, the first thing, obviously, the first question that will spring to mind when looking at a deck like this is, why would I play this over either a more depths-focused package, or a more depths-focused deck, or a more Reanimator-focused deck? And what the advantages are there?
Yeah, so, I mean, like, this is something I've heard not just about this deck, but also a lot of other decks in a lot of contexts. Is, like, if you're trying to put 2 game plans together, like, diluting those game plans tends to make them worse and makes for like a worse overall deck. And that's certainly true of many decks where you try and do that. In this instance, I actually don't think that is the case. And it may not actually be that obvious, but the game plans actually work quite well, where you end up being able to like reanimate your Hex Mages if they get killed, your Rituals and like Lotus Petals allow you to just hard cast Grave Titans. You've also got the one of Lake of the Dead to help do that.
Can you, just quickly, can I just jump in? Can you walk folks through what Lake of the Dead does? Because although it is on a few people's radars, especially the Legacy hardcores, I imagine there's a few listeners that have never actually sort of, you know, looked at the card at all. So, yeah. Sure.
So, basically, when it comes into play, you have to sacrifice a swamp, and then you can tap it and sacrifice another swamp to give you 4 black mana. So if you have 2 swamps in play, you tap them both for black mana, you play Lake of the Dead, sack one, and then you can tap it and sack the other, and that gives you 6 mana. So it can give you like a hard cast Grave Titan on turn 3. Or if you've got a Dark Ritual as well, you can just go straight for that Grizzlebrand. But which I have done before.
Very exciting. So I think, as Nathaniel said, give us a kind of like a good breakdown as to obviously the game plan's working together. I can see that, you know, there's a lot of things that kind of work in concert here. Although there's a couple of slots that I do want to quiz in a bit, and we'll talk about the sideboard later. However, what do you think if you had to convince, say, a Reanimator player to play this deck? What would be your reasoning? And is it kind of matchup based, or is it based on kind of trying to dodge different kinds of hate? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, like, despite the fact that they both have big reanimation packages, like comparing Dark Depths and Black Red Reanimator, I think they're just wildly different decks, and that may seem kind of ridiculous to say that they're so different, but like Black Red Reanimator is a very fast combo deck, and it uses like the Chancellors of the Annex to protect against Force of Will and Discard and Surgical and that sort of thing. And so that gives you, like, Chancellor is a card that you use when you're trying to go off as fast as possible. And it's also reflected in the mana base of that deck, which I think only has like 13 or 14 lands and then a ton of fast
12.
mana.
No.
Is it down to 12?
Sure
Yeah. So
Yeah.
not many. It's not trying to play a long game. And you might look at the Reanimator Depths list and think the same. And while it can have like the explosive turn 1 kills where you put a Grizzlebrand, Iona, even a Marit Lage into play on turn 1, it's actually plays a much better grindier game where your opponent has to counter like your combo stuff, and then you just build up into the Grave Titans and whatnot. And sometimes you just win by beating down with Vampire Hexmage because this game can play a good long game. Sorry, this deck can play a good long game.
It's interesting. Sorry, I was wrong. It's actually 14 lands as in the standard build. Cool. I do think. Sorry, I did mention that there were some slots that I found a bit interesting. You've actually got a single Gurmag Angler in your main deck. So talk me through that one.
Yeah, so I mean the Gurmag Angler, to be honest, I don't know if it's right. I have liked it. Sometimes Gurmag Angler is just good enough against some decks, and it's also like this weird card where you have all your fast mana, and it can so like you get a lot of mana, but you also put a lot of stuff in the graveyard quite quickly. So sometimes you get to play it as like the additional card to protect yourself from Diabolic Edict, which is kind of a weird one, but it does happen because like you use all your stuff to combo off and put something into play, and then you still have the 1 black mana and all the cards in your graveyard, so you just get to put that into play as well.
Mm-hmm. A lot of decks have a really hard time dealing with Angler, including the decks that actually play Angler. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
I actually, looking at the list, Gurmag Angler isn't the slot that I think is the most interesting. I looked at it and went, oh yeah, that makes sense. You probably want like a 4th Grave Titan, but you don't want to have it cost like 6. Mm-hmm. So Gurmag Angler's like quite close. The things, the bits. So you said that you don't think this is like a deck that you should compare to Black Red that much, and I actually sort of agree, but for slightly different reasons. So this deck, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but looking at the deck, it feels like the combo is actually make a big man what kills you.
Yeah.
And that's like, despite the fact that Vampire Hexmage doesn't make a Grizzlebrand, it does kind of it makes a big man what kills you.
Sure.
And the point of Grizzlebrand in this deck, while he draws cards, and that's great, it's also that he's a really big man what kills you.
Yeah.
Whereas Black Red Reanimator, having looked at the deck in reasonable depth and talked to people who play it to a high level, actually most of that deck, the combo is like draw 14 cards, make my opponent discard every card every relevant card in their hand.
Yeah.
Maybe my big man kills them at some point, but at that point it doesn't matter. Like I've drawn so many cards this game. Like basically, I would contend that Black Red Reanimator is probably better against stuff like Diabolic Edict than this deck is, but is like weaker against Graveyard Hate in like a kind of obvious way.
Sure, yeah, and so regards to Diabolic Edict, this deck can be quite weak against it, but because it is like it doesn't mind playing a longer game, it's usually not such a big issue. Like you're able to play around it and take things slower and use your discard to maybe take it out of their hand to begin with or whatnot.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that like you are straight cold to one Diabolic Edict, but more that a Diabolic Edict is then more like against Black Red Reanimator. I actually think Diabolic Edict is quite an embarrassing card. Sure,
because it's like it's a turn 2 play that probably isn't going to matter at that point because they're likely to have discarded it.
It's more like against Black Red Reanimator, if you play Diabolic Edict, it's probably after they've put a Grizzlebrand into play.
Yeah,
and if the Grizzlebrand's already in play, why are you casting removal spells?
Yeah.
You're still just going to die because they've already had the Grizzlebrand touched the battlefield. The game is like not necessarily over, but it's probably over.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Whereas in this deck, you're less likely to turn a single big man into a victory against removal spells for it. So I guess you also theoretically would be weaker to Swords to Plowshares. Although
yes.
Sorting Marit Lage gives you a ton of time. But I guess
Grave Titan leaves friends behind. That's a big point.
That is also a big point.
That's usually one of the main reasons to go for like if you're going to Entomb and Reanimate something, you tend to go for a Grave Titan if it's like a Swords deck, because otherwise, like, I mean, Grizzlebrand is a good option there as well, but Grave Titan leaving stuff behind is generally more important, harder to deal with.
Going back to your sort of alternate game plans, obviously Grave Titan is a lot more castable off your Make Fast Mana plan than Grizzlebrand is. And going back to what Nathaniel was saying, I think that's a really good point, actually, because just based on the numbers, looking at your reanimation targets, so we'll just run through them. Let's just talk about your creatures. So you got your Hex Mages, as you said. And then you've got your one-off Gurmag Angler, which we've touched on. Mm-hmm. And then for reanimation, your sort of, standard reanimation targets, you've got Iona, a single Iona, a single Grizzlebrand, a single Massacre Worm, and then 3 Grave Titans. And obviously, like, Black-Red Reanimator is heavy on Grizzlebrand. Like, it plays 4 of them. That's what the card does.
Yeah.
That's what the deck does. Whereas this deck is a Grave Titan deck, which is what Nathaniel touched on. And obviously that's good because based on what we said with regards to removal, Grave Titan is your man because he leaves behind friends.
Yeah, I really don't care if my opponent Diabolic Edicts me when I have Grave Titan in play.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing, right?
Swords is still bad, but
you've got
not as bad.
4 power.
Lots of the Swords decks, 4 power is actually still quite a bit of stuff.
So that one makes a lot of sense, and I quite like how we're kind of breaking that down. Let's talk about. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, Nathaniel brought up a good point earlier, which is like one of the strengths of this deck is that it doesn't really suffer from against graveyard hate. Mm-hmm. Like, obviously that is a part of your deck, but against decks that are likely to bring in hard graveyard hate, then you're just going to trim on part of that package, and then it's quite easy to get there with the sort of just hard casting part or the Dark Depths combo.
Yeah, you can kind of jockey a little bit post board, and if you had a lot of kind of like looking at what their plan is game 2 against you and then kind of adapting based on that, or are they just always, I guess they're always just bringing in the graveyard hate, so you're always just assuming that that's the case and you can kind of
I think it depends what the deck is, like if they're bringing in surgicals, then it's usually easy enough to play around that sort of thing,
sure,
or just force them to have it, and sometimes if they're bringing in surgicals, they maybe want to wasteland you off Dark Depths and surgical that as well. So like sometimes I won't change stuff until like they show me it if I'm not really expecting them to bring it in.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. It is very dependent on what the deck is that you're facing. So you talked a bit about the deck playing a longer game, which I think is reflected a little, at least in your construction of the sideboard. Because there's, I think, 4 slots I think are interesting, and I think they're interesting at least in part because they're similar to some slots I've been seeing adopted by Black-Red Reanimator players.
Sure.
But so you have 2 Hymn-to-Torax and 2 Liliana the Last Hopes.
Sure.
Should we? Should we take a kind of a whole view of the sideboard just to kind of run through it, and then we can focus in on those cards?
Yeah, sure. So, for the sideboard, you got some more reanimation targets, another Massacre Worm, and then Sigarda and Tidespout Tyrant. And you got some graveyard hate with Surgical Extraction and Leyline of the Void, a 2/2 split of each of those. Hand Disruption, 2 Duress, and 2 Hymn-to-Torax, 2 Liliana the Last Hope as well, and 2 Pithing Needle. So like the Hymn-to-Torax is, I mean, it was a card that I adopted mainly for like control matchups for decks like Miracles and Check Pile. It's very good at helping you play the long game, where you can play like games that go to turn 10 and still win, where you wouldn't expect that to be the case against decks that have so much card advantage as those decks do. Like it's also good against just some decks that have reasonable sized creatures, where often I'll trim like the excludes from the main the Exhume from the main deck and at the same time be bringing in the Hymn-to-Torax. So you Hymn-to-Torax them and then reanimate their Goyf or their Leovold or whatever, and because it is a grindier deck, that's often just enough to get there. The the Liliana is actually something I've not tested out yet, but saw on a list recently and wanted to try it out because the hardest matchup for this deck is Death and Taxes. And in the earlier builds of this deck, people were playing stuff like Dread of Night and Massacre, which personally I think are too narrow, and especially because Death and Taxes doesn't see a lot of play online. It's not worth having in your list. So I wanted to try the Liliana because they're really good against Death and Taxes, being able to just pick off so many of their creatures. And if you're able to go like turn 1 Dark Ritual, Liliana the Last Hope against Death and Taxes, then I think they're really going to struggle to beat you.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. I mean, obviously like being perfectly castable off a Dark Ritual seems pretty absurd. Just to kind of note on that, I also like, talk to me about how relevant this is, but I feel like the ability to rebuy your Hex Mages with Last Hope feels really good. I mean, what do we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that isn't actually even something I'd considered because I haven't tested them yet, but that would definitely be good because Vampire Hexmage is like a really versatile card where, like, obviously it makes Dark Depths, but it also just kills stuff like Planeswalkers and Chalices and that sort of thing. So just being able to, like, you can just put them into the graveyard easily, like, and if your opponent tries to Swords one or something, you don't even need a target with counters on it to put it into the graveyard, and then it's there if you want to reanimate it later or bring it back with Liliana, as you said.
That makes sense. I was just kind of like thinking about all the sides of the card, and then I looked at the minus, and I was like, well, we don't want any of these guys to be in our hand, do we? And then I looked at Hexmage, and I thought, oh, yeah, that one we do. Or
also, I don't think it's unreasonable that we want Grave Titan in our hand at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And depending how long the games go, you can want to bring back a Griselbrand as well.
Jeez.
But no, so the Liliana's interested me as well. It's interesting that like Death and Taxes is such a bad matchup. I think it makes sense with the discussion we had before, where like Red Black is actually quite good against Death and Taxes. Or at least that's the report I've had, because like yes, they have lots of like theoretical hate for you, but because your combo isn't actually make a big man what kills you, your combo is draw a million cards. Death and Taxes isn't very good at stopping that. So if you do that, then like you can beat a Caracas or a Swords or whatever because you drew 14 cards, so you found your way of beating it, which sometimes is Archetype of Endurance, that's a sick card.
Yeah, big pig.
But so one of the things but aside from that. One of the things I found interesting in the sideboard of a lot of Black-Red players recently has been Grim Lavamancer, and the theory that I've seen good players talk about with that card is against something you bring it in against every Deathrite Shaman deck because it's a good way of killing Deathrite Shaman, but it also doubles as like against Delver. Like Grixis Delver isn't going to keep in their lightning bolts against you, right? Those are the first things they're going to cut.
Yep.
So you play your Grim Lavamancer. They either force of will it, because, like, or they daze it, but, you know, like, they have to counter it, which is counter magic they're not spending on your, like, reanimation spells.
Yeah.
Or you get to just kind of kill every creature they play. And, like, Delver's a blue zoo deck. They don't have that many creatures that don't die to death to Grim Lavamancer, and they don't really have a good way of killing you if you just make them, like, if you just kill all their creatures.
Yeah.
And it gives you a ton of time to draw your discard for their counter magic to then like, or their grave hate or whatever, because Grixis only plays surgical, and just like you make them dead with your actual combo. But I think Liliana seems interesting to me as like in this deck because you are not necessarily trying to go off as quickly. Liliana can serve a similar purpose of like, oh okay, well I will just kill every creature that you play.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, because it's like it ultimately represents like a threat in its ultimate as well. So it's good against stuff like miracles or whatever, you know.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
that card's good against miracles in like normal decks.
Yeah.
And the ability to sort of clear the way with your discard, and then just say like, oh, you have to find your Council's Judgment now. Your Plows on your Terminuses aren't helping you, or you need to like Snapcaster to try and kill it or something like that. But I still think that's like I mean, obviously it kills Snap, so it's like, I don't know. It seems like a very, very... Obviously, it's a very good card in Legacy, and I remember when GP Seattle coverage was going, people kept saying, oh, it's the kind of breakout card of the tournament, but if you've been paying attention to Modo in the weeks beforehand, Leon the Last Hope was everywhere, and is obviously just very, very well positioned in Legacy at the moment, and just generally a very good Magic card.
Yeah, everything's an X1. All the good creatures to see play in Legacy have like 1 toughness, except for that one.
Grizzlebrand.
So, yeah, Grizzlebrand's not a creature. He's a Yawgmoth's bargain.
Sure, no, I feel
He's
that.
a Yawgmoth's bargain you can actually play in the format and that you can like reanimate. That's what he is.
Yeah.
Or you can show and tell.
Yeah.
Stupid Grizzlebrand, what a good card.
He's very, very good. So,
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk about the last few cards in the sideboard before
yeah, that's
wrapping
what I was
this up?
hoping to. Please, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like, the Tidespout Tyrant is just there for, like, the mirror and sneak and show and that sort of thing, as well as it's pretty good against, like, decks that want to bring in Ensnaring Bridge against you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not good against, like, bouncing, say, Leyline of the Void, because it's almost impossible to put it into play in the first place.
Without Leyline of the Void,
Yeah, you need, like, 3 petals, and that's just not happening. But, yeah, it's just, like, a versatile enough card that it earns a spot in the sideboard.
Mm-hmm. The Reanimator decks play that one, and just for anyone that's not familiar, it's a giant blue 5/5 flyer, and whenever you play a spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand. So bouncing all the spells that, all the permanents that we just covered with Jaren. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, then like the Sigarda it's like the main deck that it really hoses is Check Pile, because they basically can't win once you get it down unless they Toxic Deluge. But it's also like good against Miracles and good against Death and Taxes and 4-color Loam, that sort of thing. Just decks that are trying to make you sacrifice creatures or that have a lot of removal to deal with stuff. Having the hexproof 5/5 flyer is sometimes just enough.
To be clear, this is old Sigarda.
Yes, Host of Herons. The Masker Worm, I've not actually tried out these Masker Worms yet, but I just decided to go with them over like the one Elish Norn, so I'm trying one main and one side. It's obviously a different effect to Elish Norn, but working as a sweeper, I'd rather have one that I can hard cast off like all my black sources anyway, rather than like the uncastable Elish Norn. So I'm going to see if that's necessary to have like one in the main or like the one in the board. Maybe it is better to have 2 to have just access to them because you can hardcast them. But
I think as soon as you take that stance that you think that in these matchups where it is relevant you are going to hardcast them, I think that's a really good adaptation. In fact, just based on the kind of the gameplay patterns that we described earlier with the deck, and if you think that you can get that down in time against the decks where it matters, then that just sounds strictly better to me. But again, testing sounds good, obviously, but it makes sense to me.
I just want to cast it against elves when they like half go off.
Yeah, exactly.
When they glimpse and you're like, oh, I'm dead, and then they like just draw one too many lands and they just stop with like 19 creatures in play, and they're like, oh, well, I didn't get my natural order, but it'll probably die next turn. And then you're like, Massacre Worm, bam, haha! How dare you come into this format?
I think that I think you need to go through the gameplay patterns there. Obviously, it's really hard to predict. So I always talk about like gameplay patterns and things like that in in standard and modern. But as soon as you, even Legacy, but as soon as you start adding Dark Ritual into the mix, that's the whole reason that the card's kind of insane. Is that the patterns and the turns you expect things to happen.
Turns out,
yeah, it's just all kinds of messed up. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for the Masker Worm. Bring it on and let us know how that goes. Sorry, carry on. What else you got?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the Graveyard Hate, 2 Leyline of the Void, and 2 Surgical Extraction, which probably seems a bit weird, but the reason is they're good at different things, and for instance, I quite like bringing in Surgical Extraction against Miracles, which while it can target Snapcasters, it can also just because they stack the top of their deck so much, being able to disrupt them and take them off stuff that they thought they were going to draw, by shuffling their deck, and also being able to, like, another way to see what they're working with is very helpful in that matchup. So I like to bring those in against decks like Miracles, and then like Leyline of Void is just much better against Reanimator, or Dredge or whatnot. So I like to have the 2-2 split, and even if you don't open with the Leyline, because you have the rituals, sometimes you can just cast one on turn 2 or something, you know.
That's cool. Yeah, I get that.
The Duresses are just additional discard for the grindy matchups, like controlling matchups, that sort of thing.
Blue decks, basically.
Yeah, and also against like other combo decks, like Storm or whatever, then it's good to have additional turn 1 discard.
Yeah, you really don't want to be on the draw against Storm, for example, and like not have a turn 1 discard, and then they like untap on turn 2 and look at you, and you're like, "Yep, I am a mono black deck. Do with me as you will, Storm player." Yeah. And then they do, and then you die.
Yep, for sure. And then I guess the last couple of cards we haven't covered is Pithing Needle, which is just a versatile card because
you can name anything.
Yeah,
even Dark Confidant.
Or Thrum the
you
Lost
can.
Troll.
You can name Thrum the Lost Troll. You can name any card with Pithing Needle. I do think that this deck does have this sideboard does have some of my cards which seem to be my favorite, like most brought in cards when they're bad cards in Legacy. Stuff like Pithing Needle and Surgical, which like they're not bad cards. They are good cards. But many sideboards will make good use of these cards. But I had a match of Grixis Delver a little while ago where I wastelanded my opponent with I had a Liliana the Last Hope and a Young Pyromancer in play, and I wastelanded my opponent. And he surgicaled my wastelands. And I was like, you know what you need to do after being put down from 2 mana to 1, facing down and like a game-ending Planeswalker and a 2/1 that spirals? You need to shock yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly what you need to do.
That's what you need to do. That's how you win the game.
And like the funny thing is, the other card that you could bring in if you were really worried about Wasteland is Pithing Needle, which we'd also do with Liliana.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, it deals with Planeswalkers. Wasteland and Caracas are obviously like relevant in this matchup where you got the Dark Depths combo. And yeah, just whatever else is good to go. You know, like sometimes if you're playing against Turbo Depths, then you have to Pithing Needle one of the either the stage or the Hex Mage if your opponent has one and you don't.
Ooh, that's a big reason to play this over Turbo Depths, I guess. Is that the mirror doesn't, or like this against Turbo Depths doesn't seem incredibly miserable.
Yeah, no, I see that.
The Turbo Depths mirror is super miserable.
Yeah, because it just ends up as like a stall.
It's like it was like the Ad Nauseam mirror before people started playing Lab Maniac, where like you just kind of had to sit there. Like you were just like, okay, well, I guess I'll resolve my Grey Ogre. I'll resolve my Grey Ogre. Oh,
because
no!
if you tried to go off, they would just go off in response and kill you, right?
So that was how Ad Nauseam worked.
Right, exactly.
Because they play like a bunch of main deck Pithing Needles, like all the interaction and all the ways to combo usually end up getting Pithing Needled, and you just get sat there with like Vampire Hex Mages and Elvish Spirit Guides and stuff.
What I've heard is that Dark Depths is actually too much of a liability to have in the deck post-board, because your opponent can stage your depths.
Yeah. I certainly, when I'm playing these matchups with this deck, like trim some number of Dark Depths, just because it's not a great card to put into play when your opponent can copy it as well.
That is weird.
Yeah. So like, but you're like, oh, haha, you can't go off. Like they can't, you can't go off because you can't play Dark Depths because I'll stage it. Haha. But little do you know, I have a Grizzlebrand.
Yeah, or the Pithing Needle that's sitting there naming stage, you're like, okay, I'm just going to draw 7 now. Hope that's cool.
In the world of the Grey Ogres, the 8 mana 7/7 flying life-linking Yawgmoth's bargain is king.
I think it's just king.
Until they crop rotate for a Caracas.
No.
But that doesn't happen. What are you talking about?
Please just draw 14.
Don't discuss these things.
But yeah,
all right.
So that's the deck.
cool
going to
deck.
see how it goes, and hopefully ride it to PTQ victory.
Wonderful. It's kicking up a bit of buzz at the moment, so I'm really happy we could have you on to talk about it. So obviously that weekend is GP Birmingham. I think I'm not sure if we'd cover this in a previous episode, but what deck are you actually thinking about bringing to the GP itself?
I'm going to be playing Burn for the main event.
Good old Burn. You love your
Not
seal
good
first.
old Burn. Jaren Burn.
Jaren Control Burn.
That's correct.
Controlled Burn.
I actually just the last couple of days I've been writing an article about Burn, which will be going up at some point.
Wonderful.
I'm not sure if that one's going up on Murphy's Vault. I may just post it to Reddit as a bit of a rant, but we'll see.
Cool.
Nobody understands Burn like I do. Play more shocks.
Couldn't have put it better myself, Nathaniel.
Well, we'll be sure to link to it wherever it is when it does see the light of day. And yeah, well, thanks very much for coming on the show, Jaren. Really good to have you.
I will let you guys get on with the standard portion of the
we've got
of the
standard
podcast.
Yeah, we're going to talk about standard now.
And because I don't know anything about standard, I'm just going to hang up the call now.
Right. Okay, man. Well, thanks again. See you later.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Standard.
Yeah.
Brave New World. How's your week been?
I don't know what to play.
Neither do I.
The cards
it's
I
beautiful.
thought would be good are good, but nothing feels like really powerful. And whenever I play a deck, it feels like, oh, this is awkward, and oh man, this isn't quite working out. None of these cards fit together. And whenever my opponents play a deck, I die. And I know I have a brief idea of what's going on exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how to exploit that yet.
Exactly. So that's kind of what we're going to cover a little bit today, just to kind of as an exercise. We'll talk about, let's just talk about what we've been playing, first of all. So yeah, it's been, I can't remember the last time we recorded. Last time we recorded would have been before all these cards came out on Moto and everything, and we've been playing with them. Yes, our last episode was all about Khan and what we can do with him. So I know you've been playing quite a bit with Khan, so talk to me about your boy.
Almost every deck I've played has had Khan in it. Khan is very good.
Khan is extremely good.
Most of the things I said about him are true. But you don't need as many artifacts as you think.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, he's really good with Harder Kieran.
He's extremely good with Heart Kieran. So what decks exactly have you been playing? Well, obviously you've been playing Heart Kieran with Khan. There's a whole bunch of decks in the kind of Mardu pie. Some of them are kind of mono whitey, some of them are black whitey, some of them are straight, full on Mardu. What are your experiences with each? Talk me through it.
So I think every deck I have played this week has had white in it, and I think that's my big takeaway, is I think it's probably wrong to not be playing white in Standard right now.
100% agreed.
But I have tried several different flavors of Mardu vehicles, some including History of Benalia, some being more red-white, some being more black-white base. I have had the best success recently with the red-white base versions that play Phoenix and get to play Chandra Torture Defiance in their sideboard. I've also played some of the white-black versions, some of which felt pretty mopey, but after cutting some of the mopey cards and playing good cards instead, they felt a lot better, although still not hugely powerful. Although playing against them, I think it's possible I just hit like I didn't play a huge amount with them, so it's possible I just hit like streaks of bad variants. And playing against them, they've done like powerful enough things. History of Benalia is a real hell of a card.
It's a very stupid magic card.
But
I want to talk about the black-white one real quick, just while you're on the topic, because I think there's a couple of good points there, and I think that we kind of started off the week Well, certainly I did, and I think a lot of the lists that I saw online and everything started off the week kind of, let's play a little bit of black. Let's kind of dip our toes in the water, and can we play Benelish Marshall and blah, blah, blah. And I think one of the kind of discoveries that came out of that were, for the reason that we're playing a little bit of black was primarily for Scrap Heap Scrounger, because it's a very good aggressive card, which I think has gotten worse based on all the white removal.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot worse.
But
cards,
it crews Heart of Kirin. That's what kind of...
It's Cruise Heart of Kirin, and it is still good in many matchups. It's just not as good. Like, we'll talk about that. But you want to just talk about like how cards line up.
Yes,
rather
so
than
we've got a bit
decks,
of a
right?
segment on that. Yeah.
And I think that Scrappy Scrounger is a good example of how those things shift across the format and how it feels now compared to how it's felt in the past.
And another card I want to talk about that's come out of this, which is another 3-power creature, which is strong in the realm of everybody playing white cards, is Knight of Malice.
That card's pretty good.
So for anyone that's not listening, this is new kind of Black Knight variant. It's 1 and a black for a 2/2 first strike with hexproof from white. It gets +1/+0 if any player controls a white permanent. So obviously playing it in a black-white deck, it's pretty often a 3/2. If everybody else is playing white, it's very often a 3/2. It crews Heart of Kirin. It doesn't get killed by the sealaways of the format and all the white removal. And 3/2 first strike.
Yeah, first strike is actually very good right now. Yeah. There's a lot of like either things are much bigger than it, at which point like no 2-drop was ever going to do anything. Like either it's Lyra,
which is
at which point you don't have any 2-drops that match up well against Lyra, buddy. It's cool. Or they are small enough that it's just awkward. Like we said last week, I think there's lots of good 1 toughness creatures in the format, and that's still sort of true. Although those creatures have tended down in terms of power, although Chainwhirler is less of an ever-present threat. It is still a thing you have to be aware of, but it's not something you...
The format's
you're not
kind
going
of
to see it
adapted.
every week.
I think
not every match, even.
I think the format over the last kind of... Just in the first week it was on Modo, the immediate kind of heavy hitters were the Goblin Chainwhirlers and the Steel Leaf Champions, and the format has already, if not is in the process of adapting to these, and you'll still, like... I think that the real kind of servo exhibition spam decks, although they're still around and mostly either the mono-white variants, I think we're seeing a shift towards the black-white stuff or the kind of Mardu stuff that you've touched on. Toolcraft Exemplar still shows up based on the fact that it's Wildnicatl, and Wildnicatl is very good. But a lot of the 1 toughness creatures and the kind of tokens spammy element is not necessarily fallen by the wayside, but I would definitely say is on the downtick.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Should we just go into what I kind of want to cover this week and potentially in future weeks, which is something that we've been thinking about a lot at the moment with Standard, which is something that I think that we've been very cognizant of over the last few Standards. Certainly, since the kind of days of Gideon Ally of Zendikar and such. And Standard is less about, I guess the point is that Standard is less about the kind of the wheel of aggro, mid-range, and control. It's definitely something that you need to have on your radar. It's definitely something that's very important and vital to your Magic fundamentals and everything. But Standard is a format of cards, not decks. That's something that's been said for a few years. But we want to kind of pull that out and just kind of headline what the cards are to beat this weekend, because as Nathaniel said, it's a mistake not to be playing white this weekend. I firmly believe that. And whatever I'm going to be sleeving at the weekend, which I might go into in a minute, it's going to have white cards in it. I'm going to be playing Lyra Dawnbringer, and there's no kind of way around that. So what we want to do is we want to look at these cards. We want to look at the whether they're answers or they're threats, and we want to see what lines up well against them and what you should be playing. So what that kind of naturally devolves into is your kind of level 1 cards. So again, we're not necessarily talking about level 1 decks here, although we will, because obviously the extension of the cards are the decks.
You do have to play a card in a deck. You
Sure.
can't just show up and say, I am playing Karn this weekend.
But
just for Karn.
But that's what breaks down to it. So, we're going to talk about level 1, level 2. We're not going to talk about level 0 because that term really, really annoys me. So, level 1, level 2. But essentially, what the level 2 decks are doing are playing cards that interact with the heavy hitters in the level 1 decks. So that's why the cards are important, and we need to talk about them. So what do you think I'm going to preface this section, actually going further into the whole, if you're not playing white cards this weekend, I think you're wrong. I actually think that if you are not playing either the card Heart of Kiran or Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, or Teferi, however you pronounce that, Hero of Dominaria, you're wrong. I think you need to be playing one of these cards this weekend, and that might change in coming weeks. But right now, I'm just going to kind of get on my soapbox and just put that out there.
No, I totally agree. I think that Teferi and Heart of Kiran are currently doing the Hazoret Scarab God thing, where you should be playing one of them. It is wrong not to. They're not necessarily in the same kind of space.
No, that's the point.
As those cards.
Which is
kind of definitely. I would definitely agree. Those are, to me, are the two cards to beat, with another one kind of being Lyra.
Yeah, Lyra appears in both, is kind of my take on that. So I guess my point is it's just kind of what you say. They're two very diverging cards. And there has been some kind of exploration into whether or not we can put them in the same deck. And I think that maybe something exists there, but it remains to be seen. But currently, as it stands, you've got your kind of vehicle decks, which are in that Mardu pie, as we said, which are headlining your Heart of Kiran. Although I do think that there's some green-based decks which are playing Heart of Kiran, but going back to what we said, really want to be playing white. And then Teferi kind of leads you down I've seen a whole bunch of kind of weird... there's all the kind of Raf Capuchin, which is a new card.
Yeah, so I've actually played a recent amount of the blue-white decks as well.
And I don't... like that. I'm really on the more kind of hardcore control thing, which is obviously not what Heart of Kiran is about. So I guess my point
So I don't think Raf Capuchin is bad. I tried like a controlling Raf deck. Like we're playing Gear Hulks and playing a bit of a higher curve and being more like blue-white control, but you have like you're playing Lyra's main deck and you have sort of like you don't play Fumigates, you play like Lyra's and Rafts instead kind of thing. And that deck did not feel particularly strong to me. It felt kind of caught between two worlds.
My biggest problem with that deck is that you're not doing the whole game one artificial card advantage thing that control decks do. Like, you're playing all these creatures, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. So, like, that version, the one that was a bit more controlling and wasn't playing History of Benalia, basically.
Yep.
That version, you had the downside of, if my opponent is playing a Braid or Seal Away or whatever, my cards are kind of bad. Well, not bad, but they get to interact with me.
Yeah, and then you don't get that kind of natural leg up just by saying, oh, two of the cards in your hand aren't cards, and here I am doing my thing.
Yeah. But I also felt like you were relatively weak against bigger control decks because they had better counter magic suites than you, basically. You were playing, because to allow you to play as many double white cards as you were playing, you kind of had to give up on disallow.
And you're caught in this weird middle ground as a result.
You're playing Supreme Will, which, that card's not as good. At least in a control mirror.
Sure.
And at least, I don't know, so you end up having to be kind of the aggressor, but when you've built yourself as slightly more controlling, it's harder for you to be the aggressor. I am kind of interested in the more mid-rangey Wrath lists that are playing History of Benalia and can do the beatdown thing a bit more.
Yep.
And I think that there's definitely real promise there. But I played a league with the blue-white no-win cons. What do I call it?
The one that the win cons are
Pull from Tomorrow.
Yeah. So you got Pull from Tomorrow, and the way it's extremely
the way you win
deadly.
is you loop to fairies.
Yeah, you loop to fairies. Which do you want to just walk through that interaction real quick, just for?
Okay, so Teferi, five mana blue white planeswalker.
Yep.
His -3 says put target non-land permanent into its owner's library third from the top. So if you have no cards in your library because you have drawn your entire library because the game has gone on that long, then Teferi you can just never mill because you have a Teferi. So I played this blue-white deck where your win con was basically locking your opponent out of the game with Search for Ascanta Teferi. That's basically how the lock gets put together, is when you're drawing 3 extra cards a turn.
And this is in relation to Teferi's Tick Up ability, which is draw a card at the beginning of the next end step, untap 2 lands.
It's the only ability he has.
Sure.
I put against the cards so much. It's all they ever do. It comes in, they uptick him, and you're like, well, they have settled the wreckage mana now.
Yeah.
Guess I can't. I guess I'm never actually killing this Teferi, but also I can't kill them while it's there because they have access to like 1 million more mana, and they draw 2 cards a turn. Guess I'm dead.
I want to talk about that settle interaction when we get to the whole level 2 elements, but let's finish on the blue-white control, and then we can get our teeth into that.
So a lot of variants of this play Gear Hulk as a way of winning the game. You know, you control the game with Teferi, you lock them out, and then you slam a Gear Hulk and make them dead in 4 hits. But obviously, as we talked about, that also allows them to, kill your Gear Hulks with Sealaways or Abrades or Unlicensed Disintegrations or whatever people happen to be playing. So this list basically had cut the Gear Hulks for pull from tomorrow's and maybe a little bit more interaction. And was playing 2 Gideon of the Trials. Although in my experience, you never actually attacked with Gideon of the Trials.
Exactly. Gideon of the Trials is there to turn off vehicles. Specifically Heart of Kirin, actually, that's what I was going to say.
He's there as an icy manipulator.
Yeah, and basically, so Heart of Kirin interacts very, very well with Seal Away, which is a big reason why it's a good card for the weekend. Seal Away only exiles tapped creatures, and it's really, really good because it's not tapped and attacking. It's just, they just need to be tapped. You do it end of turn and everything, but obviously Heart of Kirin has vigilance, and so it's a kind of blind spot for the deck, and Gideon remedies that excellently because you just play Gideon, you can just keep ticking up on the heart, and you kill everything else that they play, and you're golden. Yes.
So Gideon is just like an icy manipulator,
for sure.
And sometimes I guess he can. If you've effectively... So, again, the way you lock your opponent out, in addition to the Search for Azcanta Teferi thing, is Teferi's ultimate is whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent an opponent controls. So, you plan to get his emblem, and then exile everything, and then when you can't mill, your opponent will mill first. Because they can never really establish a board.
Yeah.
Gideon can kind of do a kind of slightly bad impression of that, because while you aren't getting card draw triggers to keep exiling your opponent's permanents, Gideon of the Trials does have an emblem that means you can't lose the game while you control a Gideon. So if you can't mill and your opponent can't really do anything because you've locked them out of the game, then Gideon can prevent you from... Gideon prevents you from losing in that way.
Sure.
As well. But that's, pretty secondary. He's mostly an icy manipulator.
I see. And, the differences between Zach, obviously, as we talked about Pull from Tomorrow, so this Gideon sort of much slower version is playing Pull from Tomorrow's, and the Gear Hulk versions are playing your 4 mana draw 2 cards of the format, which is mostly in the form of Hieroglyphic Illumination with, usually 1 Glimmer. So, what do you think about... Obviously, I think blue-white control is kind of ascending right now. It's sitting sort of towards the top of the format. What's your take on the decks?
The blue-white control decks? Okay. I mean, I think they're very strong.
Yeah.
Whenever I've played them, So the league I played blue-white, no win cons through. I didn't face an opponent who didn't have white in their deck. I won 1 match against some Planeswalker nonsense thing.
Okay.
Playing Oath of Teferi. I lost game 2 because I didn't know what was going to happen, so I didn't really sideboard very much. I brought in a couple cards. I was I had seen 2 lands, and then my opponent conceded to a turn 2 Search for Azcanta, which is okay.
Sure.
Okay. I could see Island, Hinterland Harbor, so I was maybe it's ramp, but I don't really know. So, I don't know, I'm going to sideboard really lightly. And I did that, and then they played maybe 10 Planeswalkers. And I was oh, okay, in game 2, and then I lost. And then in game 3, I think they conceded after I counted them down to they had 1 card in hand. And then, and I had 1 card in hand. And then in their end step, I played Pull from Tomorrow, and they conceded.
Yep.
Because that card is very, very good at completely shutting down a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you draw 5 cards or 6 cards, then
it's too many cards.
It's just simply over.
Yeah.
At that stage.
So I'm pretty into the white control for this weekend.
Okay, but that was the match I won.
Sure, right.
I lost the second match to time
Mhm.
after I won a 20-minute on my part control mirror in game 1,
Right.
and then was not able to win another game in the time I had left. Which, albeit, was probably me mismanaging clock, but also like, oh boy.
It's tough, yeah. There's
Like the deck just has a bunch of stuff that's going on, and especially online.
Yeah.
When the one thing I found is it takes a lot longer to win a control mirror than it does to lose a control mirror, because when you're winning, you generally have to ferry.
Mm-hmm.
So every end step, you have to like untap 2 lands.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a bunch of mechanical things to be doing.
Yeah, which with a
these
chess
control
clock
decks.
is a big problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I feel that.
So I had a lot of issues with clock in the league because the deck is so slow, and I was just trying my best to be mechanically fast, and it's probably a little bit of like not quite perfectly like I'm not quite perfectly familiar with the deck's play patterns exactly yet, but yeah, it was just kind of. I faced a lot of control mirrors, which I'm gonna be honest, I didn't feel as advantaged in as I thought I should be. I felt advantaged in game 1, and then post board, all my opponents were playing black and brought in duress, and suddenly I felt real bad.
Yeah. No, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly
but
what you mean.
despite that, I do think the deck is like a very good level 1,
Yeah.
and I think this and white black are like the level 1s of the format.
Yeah, so the white-black vehicles deck, again, a Heart of Kieran deck, a Khan deck, a Toolcraft Exemplar deck, has been kind of doing the rounds online. It looks very strong. It's playing Knight in Malice, History of Benalia, Khan. Those are 2 really, really big heavy hitters from the new set. All of these decks are playing Lyra Dawnbringer, mostly in the sideboard, but you're seeing quite a few main deck ones too. The card's very, very good and absolutely has to be on your radar for post-board games. Your control decks are definitely bringing it in, and you need to kind of have that on your radar and when you're sideboarding. So now that we know, we've sort of established what this looks like, what the landscape is, how do we exploit that? So a couple of things that I'm going to talk about. I think the obvious one that we kind of covered this week was Lyra's very weak to murder, right?
Yeah, Baneslayer Angel is bad against Doomblade.
Yeah. No, that's not a newsflash. So, like, in terms of that, what the murders look like, I think that the 2 big cards that we kind of want to see are Unlicensed Disintegration, which is what you want to be playing this weekend.
Kind of. I'm still not sure if I want to just play white-black, but...
Sure. I mean, I don't think either of
the
us...
reason to
really
play
often...
Mardu is Unlicensed Disintegration, I think.
Sure. For that kind of... obviously, for that kind of effect... the problem there is that obviously the decks around them need to exist, but I think it often starts with, what's our problem and how do we solve it? And I think that I think there's a gap for a Chupacabra deck. I'm not sure, but in terms of murders, Chupacabra is a good murder. You need to find ways to make the 2/2 body relevant, so that's either through how your deck is working, or is it relevant in the matchup, in the landscape of the format. But those are kind of my immediate thoughts there.
So I'm not big on Chupacabra because, in my opinion, the 2 creatures with big air quotes around one of them that you need to be killing are Lyra and Heart of Kieran. Those are the 2 biggest things on any board.
I see. So
Chupacabra only kills the Lyra,
and the Unlicensed Disintegration being an instance, obviously,
yeah.
Very,
So
very
that's the big thing to me, is that when I say murder is good, I don't just mean an effect that says destroy target creature.
It's the
I mean
instant speed.
an instant speed effect.
I see what you
destroy
mean.
Target creature.
I see what you mean. Okay. And then obviously
so-
Cast Down doesn't kill either of these.
Yeah, Cast Down I think is actually quite poor right now.
Very poor.
It just doesn't interact very well with any of the things people are doing. It may interact very well at some point in the future when if like Steel's Champion decks become really good for in a moment again, or if Mono Red is good again. I think that Cast Down's quite good against them. Although Seal Away is just so absurdly good against Mono Red and Steel's Champion that I have a hard time believing I would move away from a white deck if those became good. But yeah, so I think that like the card and play patterns you have to be able to beat this weekend. The big one is Settle the Wreckage, actually, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I want to just talk about that because you described Teferi uptick, untap, 2 lands to have exactly 4 lands to settle. Do you think that in this kind of vehicle space, so let's assume that, we're one of the level 1s, and we want to beat the other level 1 that's trying to settle the wreckage us, do you think, based on the mana that we've got, that there's some kind of scope for basically an Esper build? Where, we exploit cards. I'm not sure if it's Metallic Rebuke or if it's, any negates.
So in blue-white, it's definitely not Metallic Rebuke, I don't think.
Right, so it can
I don't think you play nearly enough artifacts for that.
Oh, sure, okay. So it can be like... no, so I'm talking about like a vehicle, black-white base vehicle deck that has sideboard like negates and...
Oh, yeah, sorry. Did I say blue-white? I meant to say black-white.
Sure. Oh, and potentially, like, I don't know why you wouldn't play Teferi in that shell. And do you think that there's scope for that?
I think there's a possibility of that. I do think that it makes your mana a little bit worse. But splashing blue is of interest, especially because, like, you get to play the lands that work well together.
Yep.
In terms of you're only playing 1 fast land, I think.
Yeah, Concealed Courtyard, yeah.
Yeah, but you do get to play 2 check lands and a white. I think this is important. You get to play a white cycle land.
Yep.
Because a lot of the time, like, playing a white cycle land on 1 is not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the decks are playing like If Near Dead lands.
Yeah.
And it's very possible that it's correct to be playing, to be like cutting down on, like, obviously Isn't Down makes black, so it's sort of free.
Sure.
Those are the sorts of things that tend to get lost because they just make your mana base that little bit more painful, that little bit worse. So those are things you tend to lose. And I've actually had If Near Dead lands matter for me a non-zero percentage of the time. Mm-hmm. So definitely it would be a loss. But I do think that, like, the cards that are best against Settle the Wreckage are Negate and Duress.
Yep. And the ability to play both in the sideboard of your aggressive deck. And I know that obviously, you're a long-time vehicles guy, and you've played your good bit of counter magic out of the sideboard, whether it was Spell Queller or Metallic Rebuke or whatever. So yeah, I kind of wanted to pick your brain on that because I think that that's like potential room for these play patterns that we're exploring and how we beat them.
Yeah, so I do think that you probably can build an Esper version of the like white-black vehicles deck that people are playing. Mm-hmm. Even if it's just for negate in the sideboard. And maybe a Teferi. You can maybe replace like the Liliana with a Teferi.
That was my feeling. That's what I was going to suggest, because they've got that big 5-mana Haymaker Planeswalker in the sideboard.
So the only thing I would say is that Teferi doesn't play nearly as well with this deck.
Sure.
As Liliana does.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know you said, I don't know why you wouldn't put Teferi in, and the answer is, to me, because, like, he's not just a blue-white card, he is actually quite a controlling blue-white card.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, drawing a card is nice, but I'm not actually as excited about 5-mana Howling Mine, or 5-mana, like...
Phyrexian Arena, or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. 5-mana Phyrexian Arena, as I am about, like, 5-mana Draw and make a free 2/2, or 5-mana Reanimate Lyra Dawnbringer.
Yeah, okay.
In these sorts of builds.
Yeah,
I mean, card advantage is always good, but Khan's sort of always already doing that and fulfilling that.
Sure, that's a good point, actually, yeah. It's that kind of, that space is already not necessarily occupied, but it's sort of spoken for. You aren't doing anything else with his
plus. Yeah. You aren't using every bit of Teferi. Like, the minus is still pretty good, obviously. And maybe when you're turning into a Settle the Wreckage deck, although you don't really fully turn into a Settle the Wreckage deck, but maybe when you do that, you're like playing, you're interested in like the untapping lands, but you're not really doing much with that. And
so
just in general, I think that, like, I do think it would, if you were doing it would be just for negate,
sure,
in my opinion.
Okay, no, that makes sense to me.
But that is interesting to me, and I might see if I can fiddle with some mana bases and see if I can't fit blue into these sideboards, because I have felt like the control decks are very, very powerful. And if you stumble a little bit against them, then letting them like get a Teferi online is pretty much game over.
Yeah, that's
it's
it.
So hard to beat,
and you need to beat them in that turn that we just described, where they're not necessarily greedy. They just know that they've got the settle in their hand, and they, rather than trying to tuck one of your permanents to sort of stabilize the board a bit.
So rarely seen Teferi tuck a permanent.
Yeah, because he goes down to 1 loyalty, and like when he goes up to 5. And if you untap and you have counter magic and or removal based on what the board state is,
basically both of Chandra's pluses.
Yeah, it's absurd. So the card's extremely strong.
Is really good.
So I'm just conscious of time, but I do want to kind of do more exploration in this realm and just sort of keep up whenever we're covering standard on our weekly basis. Just sort of keep our finger on the pulse and make sure that we understand what's important, and sort of try and explore ways to beat it. Because I think that's just a good exercise. So although this is probably going to come out after this weekend. But I imagine it'll still be relevant for the next week. If you are playing, and you're not playing either Teferi or Heart of Kirin, I think you need to have a good long hard look at your deck list and really understand what you're trying to achieve there, and whether or not it sort of exploits any kind of gaps or beats these cards or plays into the play patterns in your favor. You gotta
have a good reason.
You have to have a damn good reason, I think.
We said we were going to talk about Scrappy Scrounger. Briefly touching on it,
sure.
That card used to be like the nuts against control.
Yep.
It used to be that like Mardu vehicles just always beat control, because control couldn't do anything against Scrappy Scrounger. The introduction of Seal Away, like Magma Spray sort of hurt Scrappy Scrounger, but then again, like blue-black control was like a really big thing, and that still was like Vraska's contempting Scrappy Scrounger, which that did not feel good on the black and the blue-black control side.
Sure, and that's why the Grixis decks showed up, just so they could play Magma Spray basically, and it was largely in part because of that card.
Yeah, but like Seal Away and Settle the Wreckage. Settle the Wreckage has sort of seen play, but like it's been so hard to have a good white deck. I think that's something we didn't touch on as much as I would like, but basically like it's been a long time, in my opinion, since white has been a good color in Standard. There's been white decks that have been successful, but very rarely have they been based on like individually powerful white cards.
For sure.
They've always been like synergy niche things, whereas the introduction of Seal Away and Lyra and History Benalia mean that white suddenly has powerful cards that it can play. Yeah. In addition to like good pieces of removal. Teferi is another one of those. And Scrappy Scrounger is bad against white removal because they all exile it. Yeah. And so it was just a 2-mana 3/2.
As you said, we were talking about this before the show. There's, I think what you said, like the like powerful cards versus synergy driven. There's a very, very big difference between Pride of Conquerors and Gideon Ally of Zendikar. And they both created decks around them. But there's a very, very clear kind of...
One of them did it because, like, Gideon Ally of Zendikar is a card that you want to play because he is good. Yeah. And one of them is, Pride of Conquerors is a card that you, like, build your deck to enable, if you know what I mean. In a very different fashion.
Absolutely. So, yeah, play white this weekend. Play Teferi or Heart of Kirin.
Play white and play either blue or black, in my opinion, alongside those. Because without Duress in your deck, I think if you're playing Heart of Kirin and you aren't playing Duress, I think you're going to have an incredibly hard time beating the control decks. And if you're playing Teferi, you have to play blue. So
Yep. You gotta. So I think that's a good kind of point to wrap up. So thanks for joining us tonight. Check us out at murphysvault.com. Let's do Twitter handles. What's yours?
I am at RInsideF.
And I'm at Dan Nathaniel. We'll put them in the show notes, as well as all the bits and bobs that we've talked about, including Jaren's deck list, as well as we could maybe pop some bits and bobs in for Standard, but we'll see. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Check out murphysvault.com. We'll put a link for the WordPress site as well, because there's some we've got a kind of growing team of writers, and articles are really coming out on a regular basis now, which is fantastic. So there's a whole bunch of good content for you to consume on there. Any closing thoughts, Nathaniel?
I don't know. I'd never make me play a control mirror again.
Okay.
Please. It's so it's like I love decks that have like the main plan is make your opponent dead. Or like a part of the main plan is that, so that you can always like fall back on it as a backup plan. It's why I like Grixis Delver in Legacy, right? Because you get to, you can play all these like interactive cards, and you get to like play lightning bolts and daisies and but then sometimes your opponent's doing something weird, so you play Delver of Secrets and you make them dead.
Yep. I'm full on board with
the
that.
blue-white control decks with no win cons are like the antithesis of this, and it makes me so like unhappy to just sit there. Both of us just draw going for like 6 turns in a row.
Agreed.
There's like the absolute opposite reason of why I play Magic, and
I feel you.
I just should like every time there's a good control deck in Standard, I'm like, I should try it because I know I don't like control decks, but I should try it. And, like, if it's good, I should play it because that's just what we should do. And I try it, and it's so miserable, and I want to kill myself. And I'm just like, why do I do this to myself every time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite as as opposed to it as you are, but I was playing the Gearhawk version at practice last night, and by the end of the practice, I was like, I should probably just play Pull from Tomorrow and not play any creatures, and I don't know. But yeah, we'll see. Listen, we should close.
Yes.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We've been From the Vault, and you've been fantastic. Cheers.